Assalamualaikum students, how are you? I hope all of you are fine and doing good. Today we are going to discuss something about bryophytes. We're going to discuss the division bryophyta. Let us go to the previous lecture. First of all, let's open the board of the previous lecture so we can have a look at what we studied in the previous lecture. Then we can have a little bit of revision. We studied about the general characteristics of plants. We studied that we have two types of plants, and those plants are, they have vascular bundles, also known as conducting tissues. And we have those plants that do not have vascular bundles, and they are called the non-vascular plants. And they are, the main example is bryophyte. I also told you that bryophytes, they are photosynthetic in nature, and bryophytes, they are divided into three main divisions. We have three main subdivisions of bryophytes. So we will be discussing briefly the life cycle of bryophytes. We are going to see the sporophyte and gametophyte generation also. We are going to see which generation is stronger, and we are going to also discuss the general life cycle of bryophytes. Now, first of all, the general characteristics of bryophytes. We will be discussing the general characteristics of bryophytes. Generally, bryophytes are known as amphibious plants. They are known as amphibious plants. Why are they known as amphibious plants? They are known as amphibious plants because they are dependent on water. Dependent on water for what? Dependent on water for their sexual reproduction. Without water, the sexual reproduction of bryophytes is impossible to occur. Just like amphibia, frogs, toads, salamander, they need water for production. They go into water and lay eggs there. Likewise, bryophytes also have the same behavior. They need water for reproduction. Without water, bryophytes will not be able to reproduce. That is why they are known as amphibious plants, right? This is also ensuring their survival on land. Next, after that, bryophytes have very small size. They are generally very small in size, and very small in size means that because they do not have vascular bundles, if they have very large sizes, then it will be very difficult to support the body. It will be very difficult to bring up mineral salts. So this small size, it helps their existence in that water can just diffuse or simply move up by osmosis, and the requirement of food and nutrition is covered by the bryophyta very easily. Then they do not require any kind of extra support mechanism because the body is small and it is very light. Then these bryophytes, they are also having a chlorophyll supply, which means that they will produce their food by themselves. In bryophyte now, something very important is we see alternation of generation. Alternation means changing over. Generation means the dominant or the gametophyte or the sporophyte generation. In bryophytes, the dominant generation, which is photosynthetic, which is stronger, which is independent, is the gametophyte generation. The gametophyte generation, it is dominant in bryophytes. It has n number of chromosomes. It has n number of chromosomes. It supports the sporophyte generation. It supports the sporophyte generation, which cannot exist independently. The sporophyte generation has 2n number of chromosomes, and it is totally dependent on the bryophyte generation. It is totally dependent on the bryophyte generation. Inside the gametophyte generation, we see the production of gametes, and inside the sporophyte generation, we see the production of spores. The spores in the sporophyte. Now, we see various kinds of divisions, mitosis and meiosis. Mitosis and meiosis divisions are going to take place. Mitosis and meiosis divisions takes place in the sporophyte and in the gametophyte generation. Okay? Mainly mitosis division takes place in gametophyte. And the meiosis generation, the meiosis division, it is seen to occur only in the sporophyte. And in the sporophyte, at what position? In the sporophyte, in the capsule. In the sporophyte, in the capsule, or we can say in the sporangium. In the sporangium, we see the gametophyte generation is going to divide in the sporangium inside the sporophyte. Right. Now let us go back to the main presentation so that I can discuss with you people what we have about division Bryophyta. We are just going to discuss the general characteristics. As I told you people earlier, that we will cover things bit by bit so that it can become easy for you people to study. Division Bryophyta. These were the first plants to colonize land, but they are poorly adapted because they are weak, they do not produce seeds, they do not have a vascular bundles, they are very delicate plants, they are mainly seen to be present in the wet and the humid areas. They are mainly confined to damp and shady places because they do not have a very extensive root system. Bryophytes, generally, we have three main subdivisions of bryophytes. That is the Hepaticopsida, Bryopsida, okay? We have Hepaticopsida, we have Bryopsida, and we have one more division, Antherosopsida, known as the Antherosopsida. Hepaticopsida are known as the liverworts, liver, Hepaticopsida. Bryopsida generally contain the general example adiantum. We will discuss that, and then the next one that we have is the Antherosopsida. Antherosopsida are known as the hornworts because they have horn-like structures present on them. Now look here. This is a general structure. This is the green part, which is the sporophyte. This is a club moss. This is a Bryopsida, and Funera moss is the example. This is the Gametophyte generation, and this is the Sporophyte generation, which is totally dependent on them. Now, these are liverworts. Look at the liver shape of the Gametophyte, and then look here, the main Sporophyte generation is dependent on it. Bryophyta are called amphibious plants because they need water for fertilization. They need water for fertilization. They are thought to have evolved from algae because like algae, they do not have a proper plant body. They have a plant-like body. They are thought to have evolved from algae, from green algae, because they share the similar type of chlorophylls. They lack vascular bundles. They lack supporting tissue. They transport materials by simple diffusion. They are non-flowering plants. They do not produce flowers. They do not produce seeds. They show a regular alternation of generation with a dominant, independent, free-living, autotrophic gametophyte, which is haploid in number. And a sporophyte consisting of only a foot, a seta, and a capsule, which is partially or wholly, most of the time, dependent on the gametophyte. The gametophyte has root-like structure, which is called rhizoid. It has stem-like structure, and it has leaf-like structures. Why? Because it lacks vascular bundles. Vascular bundles are not present. Now, this is a general representation of the alternation of generation. These are the gametophytes. This is the gametophyte. And this plant is monoecious, means that it has both the male and the female structures present on it. Now, this is a root-like structure. This is a stem-like structure. These are the leaf-like structures. And somewhere in these leaves are present the male and the female. The male and the female structures are present on the same plant, and this situation is known as monoecious. The male is going to produce the male sperms or antherozoids, which are flagellated, which will swim through the water and come to the female archegonium and fertilize the egg. How is it going to be attracted here? There is a special chemical produced by the archegonium, and that special chemical, it attracts the antherozoids. And the antherozoid moves towards the female. This is known as chemotaxis, a positive chemotaxis. It is going to fertilize it, and now we have a 2N embryo on top of the gametophyte. The 2N embryo is then going to germinate. And now look here, on top of the gametophyte, we have the sporophyte, which is developing, which has a foot for anchoring, the seta, and the capsule. Meiosis is going to take place inside the capsule, and then haploid spores are going to be released, and haploid spores will germinate, and then they will give rise to a new gametophyte generation. Now, this is a general frame of alternation of generation. Now, in the next class, we will be discussing the life cycle of bryophytes. And in the life cycle of bryophytes, we will study the detail of the various kinds of bryophytes and their life cycle. This is the root-like structure. These are the leaf-like structures of the gametophyte. This is the seta. This is the capsule, which has a cover operculum, and then the this operculum, it covers the capsule. Inside the capsule, meiosis takes place, and spores, haploid spores, are going to be produced. Okay, in the next class, we will be discussing about the life cycle of bryophytes. See you next time. Assalamu alaikum, students. How are you? See you. Nice to have you people again with me. I hope you people are enjoying the lectures. Okay, we have started the main chapter of plant A, and in plant A, we have started discussing the vascular and the non-vascular plants. I gave you people the introduction of plant A, and then we have discussed the general characteristics of bryophytes. And today we are going to discuss a general example of Bryopsida bryophyta. We are going to discuss a general characteristic of bryophyta, which are amphibious plants. And these amphibious plants, they are known as amphibious plants because they are generally dependent on water for their sexual reproduction. How are they dependent on water for their sexual reproduction? They are dependent on water for their sexual reproduction because the male antherozoids are flagellated. The male antherozoids, they are flagellated and they need water to move from one place to another. These antherozoids, they move to the female by chemotaxis, and then they fertilize the female on top of the gametophyte body. Let us go and look at the brief introduction of the topic, and then we will come back to the board and discuss the details again. Okay. Bryophytes have two generations, the sporophyte and the gametophyte. The sporophyte is haploid. It produces haploid spores in the sporangia, which are homosporous. Homosporous means producing the same kind of spores. What does it mean? It means producing the same kind of spores. When we say something is homosporous, we say that it is producing the same type of spores. And when we say that it is heterosporous, then that means K, heterosporous is a little bit higher development, and heterosporous means K, it is producing different kinds of spores. It is producing different types of spores, but this is homosporous, which means that bryophytes are producing the same types of spores. The gametophyte generation of bryophytes is it is dependent on the sporophyte generation. And let us go back and let us see what we have in the sporophyte generation, in the other generation. Okay. In the gametophyte generation, the general characteristics of the gametophyte generation, let us discuss it once. It shows alternation of generation, and with a gametophyte generation, which is dominant, which is independent, which is free living, which is autotrophic, okay, dominant, n number of chromosome, independent, free living, autotrophic, gametophyte generation. Sporophyte generation, it consists of foot, seta, and capsule partially, and mainly it is wholly dependent on the gametophyte. This is a general form of the life cycle that we have seen, and now we will be going to the detail of the life cycle. Let me rub this off first. Okay. Now, The sporophyte, it produces haploid spores in the sporangia. This is the sporangia where meiosis is going to take place, and these are the covers of the sporangia which open up when the haploid spores are ready. Bryophytes, generally, the germination of the spores from bryophytes, it gives rise to the haploid gametophyte. Multicellular male antheridia and multicellular female archegonia are organs that are produced on same, in that situation, monoecious or different plants. It is called dioecious, and they are protected by sterile hair, sterile cells, sterile hair, which are known as paraphysis. Paraphysis. Formation of gametes by the sex organs, the male gametes, antherozoids, and the antheridia takes place. This is the antheridia in which the antherozoids are going to be produced, and then the female gametes and the eggs in the archegonia. This is the archegonium, and this is a protected egg. It is going to be produced inside this area. The life cycle of a general life cycle of the moss, when we see fertilization occurs when the antherozoids are attracted chemotactically towards the archegonia. Fertilization takes place when this sperm is going to be attracted to the egg, and fertilization is going to take place over here, and a 2N zygote is going to be produced. The zygote is going to divide, it is going to germinate, and on top of the gametophyte, 1N gametophyte, the 2N sporophyte is going to germinate. This 2N sporophyte, meiosis takes place inside the 2N sporophyte, and haploid spores are going to be produced, and these haploid spores will then germinate and give rise to the gametophyte generation again, and then the life cycle goes on and on like that. Sometimes you can have a male plant separate, sometimes you can have male and female separate, sometimes you can have them on the same plant. One sperm fuses with an egg and a diploid zygote is formed that later develops into the embryo. This is the embryo. The zygote is formed, and this is the embryo. Alternation of generation of a haploid multicellular gametophytic generation with a diploid multicellular sporophytic generation. It is observed in all plants. In some plants, the sporophyte is dominant. In some plants, the gametophyte is dominant. In the advanced plants, the sporophyte is dominant, and the gametophyte has become reduced and inconspicuous. As we go on, we will study the examples in detail. The sporophyte develops within the gametophyte and is partially or completely dependent upon it. The sporophyte develops within the gametophyte, on the gametophyte, and is partially or completely dependent on it. Right? Now, the next topic that we will be discussing is the adaptation to land habitat of bryophytes. We have already discussed these things. We will just read them over so that we can see how bryophytes are well adjusted to the land environment. How they are well adjusted to the land environment. Okay. Water conservation by formation of multicellular body and development of cuticle. Cuticle is present on top of them to prevent unnecessary evaporation or loss of water. Development of photosynthetic tissues into special chambers for absorption of carbon dioxide. Special stomata are not present. So, but we have chambers, we have pores through which the carbon dioxide is going to come in for the process of photosynthesis. Development of rhizoids for water absorption and anchorage. Development of rhizoids for water absorption and anchorage, right? Development of rhizoids. Rhizoids are root-like structures for absorbing water and for fixing them in the soil. Now, these are the things, these are the structures that are helping the existence of bryophytes on land. Evolution of heterogamy. Evolution of heterogamy means development of different types of gametes. The eggs and the antherozoids are different from each other by forming a non-motile egg. The egg is not motile anymore. The egg will not be released anymore. Formation of embryo protected inside the female organ. The female organ, we have already observed it in the previous sketch. You can scroll back and I'll show you again. Formation of embryo protected inside the female organ. Then development of alternation of generations to produce the best genetic combination for adapting terrestrial environment. Now, this is why alternation of generation is very important. It produces a best genetic combination because sexual production is also taking place, and then meiosis is also taking place, which is going to adapt it to the best terrestrial environments. In the next class, what will we be doing? We will be discussing the various classifications of Bryophyta. We'll see the classes of Bryophyta, and we will give a general discussion to the classes of Bryophyta. Now, we're going to end the lecture over here and see you people next time.